My name is Savannah, and I'm 33 years old. For years, I consistently transferred $5,000 into my parents' account every single month so they could enjoy an effortlessly comfortable, early retirement. But on the most important day of my life, as I stood in my wedding dress, looking out at a completely empty front row where my family should have been, my mother nonchalantly told me over the phone that my wedding just wasn't much of a priority for them. I didn't cry. Instead, with total clarity, I opened my banking app and permanently closed the Savannah ATM. Less than 30 minutes later, as security guards surrounded them in the VIP lounge of a luxury car dealership in Miami, they were screaming hysterically at me over the phone. Before I get into the full story, if you've ever had to set hard financial boundaries with toxic family members, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel. The grandfather clock in the bridal suite was ticking relentlessly. It was 3 o'clock on the dot. Through the sheer curtains overlooking the Chicago skyline, I could see guests taking their seats. Bennett, my brilliant and incredibly patient groom, was already standing at the altar. But all my focus was locked on the 6 chairs in the very front row. They were tied with white silk ribbons reserved exclusively for my family, and every single one of them was empty. My heart was pounding in my chest. I picked up my phone and called my mother, Beverly. After 4 rings, she finally answered. There was no apology, no background noise of heavy traffic from racing to make it on time. Just blaring bass music, clinking champagne glasses, and people cheering in the background. "Mom, where are you guys?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay level. "The ceremony is starting." Beverly let out an annoyed sigh, as if my once-in-a-lifetime wedding was nothing more than a telemarketer interrupting her day. "I already told you we were busy, Savannah. Terrence is signing a massive commercial lease down here in Miami today for Madison's new lifestyle brand flagship. We're celebrating her launch. Your little budget courthouse-style wedding just isn't our priority right now. Stop bothering us." The offhand cruelty in her voice completely drained the air from my lungs. My whole life, my younger sister, Madison, had been the golden child. While I pulled endless all-nighters grinding for my credentials as a certified fraud examiner and forensic accountant, Madison had everything handed to her on a silver platter. When she wanted to launch a business with her husband, Terrence, a former college football player who rebranded himself as a venture capitalist, my parents felt entitled to demand my financial backing. After all, I was the one making a high 6-figure salary at a top firm in Chicago. I was the one expected to be responsible. "I am literally getting married right now, and you're at a nightclub in Miami?" I asked, as the cold reality began to settle in. "Terrence is a visionary," Beverly snapped defensively. "He needed to secure this prime location today, and he needed his family around to celebrate this historic moment. You have Bennett. You don't need us standing there just to watch you sign a piece of paper. We'll send you a postcard." I stood there frozen in an $8,000 custom wedding gown, staring at the blank screen. A normal bride might have broken down sobbing. A normal daughter might have begged. But I'm not a normal daughter. I'm a forensic accountant. I deal in ledgers, audit trails, and cold, hard facts. And the fact was, for an entire decade, I had been single-handedly funding my family's lifestyle, maintaining their illusion of wealth. I opened the Chase app on my phone and navigated to the recurring transfers tab. Right at the top was a scheduled monthly payment labeled Parents' Retirement. On the first of every month, $5,000 was automatically deducted from my hard-earned paycheck to fund Beverly and Richard's country club dues and cosmetic treatments. My hand didn't shake for a second. I swiped left and tapped Cancel Recurring Transfer. A green checkmark flashed on the screen, confirming the cancellation, but I wasn't done. I opened my American Express app. I had previously issued my father, Richard, an authorized user card under my Centurion Black account, strictly designated for emergencies. Given the booming club music in the background, I knew exactly how they were funding their Miami getaway. I accessed the card settings, selected report lost or stolen, and permanently froze the account in a fraction of a second. I locked my phone, handed it to my maid of honor, and took a slow, deep breath. I walked down the aisle with my head held high, my eyes locked onto Bennett the entire time. When I reached him, he took my hand, gently rubbing his thumb over my knuckles. We spoke our vows with absolute clarity. For those 20 minutes, the toxic weight of my family completely evaporated from my universe. The moment we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, my maid of honor hurried over with a look of pure panic. "Savannah, your phone has been buzzing nonstop ever since you gave it to me." I took the device. The screen showed 47 missed calls and a relentless flood of frantic text messages. I unlocked it just as another call came through. Before I could even say hello, my father's voice exploded through the speaker in a hysterical rage. "What on earth did you do?" "My card was declined," Richard screamed. "Declined? Right in the middle of the VIP lounge at the Porsche dealership." "The manager cut my card in half right in front of everyone, and now security is holding us here because their system says we're using a reported stolen card." I stood in the venue hallway, adjusting the lace on my dress. "I'm a married woman now, Dad," I said calmly. "I have a new family, and my financial priority is my husband and our future together. Moving forward, you'll need to use your own money to fund Madison and Terrence." I could hear Beverly screaming in the background, panicking about how they were going to pay for their luxury hotel suite in Miami. Suddenly, the phone was ripped from my father's hand. Terrence's deep, aggressive voice boomed over the line. "Listen to me, you arrogant little snake," Terrence growled, his voice dripping with malice. "You just triggered a liquidity default on my commercial lease. You have no idea the legal nightmare I will bring down on you for this." I let out a cold laugh. "I'm a forensic accountant, Terrence. I know a million times better than you how a legal nightmare actually works. Enjoy Miami." I ended the call, turned around, and walked back into the reception to dance with my husband. At the time, I had no idea that cutting off their funds would unravel a massive web of financial fraud, nor could I have anticipated that my family was about to show up at my front door, desperate to drain every last drop I had. Bennett and I decided to take a short, quiet 3-day weekend at a secluded lakeside cabin in Wisconsin to unwind. It was exactly what we needed. We kept our phones off, blocked out the noise, and focused entirely on the life we were building together. But as we drove back to the Chicago suburbs on Tuesday evening, that familiar knot of tension returned to my stomach. The peace of the cabin was over, and reality was waiting for us ahead. The moment Bennett turned onto our quiet, tree-lined street, my instincts immediately put me on high alert. A massive, black full-size SUV was parked sideways in our driveway, half on the pavement and half crushing our manicured lawn. I recognized the vehicle instantly. It was a luxury lease they drove, but one I had been making the monthly payments on. 4 people were standing right in the middle of our driveway, completely blocking access to the garage. They were the last 4 people on earth I wanted to see. My mother Beverly, my father Richard, my sister Madison, and her husband Terrence. Under the harsh glare of our headlights, their posture was rigid and hostile. Bennett hit the brakes and shifted into park. He turned to me, his jaw set with quiet determination. I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped into the cool, early autumn air. The second my feet hit the ground, the theatrical performance began. Beverly let out a dramatic, piercing wail. Throwing her hands into the air, her legs went completely limp as she collapsed onto the front lawn. She clutched her chest, gasping theatrically for air, while kicking her feet against the grass. It was a textbook fake panic attack, staged entirely to grab the attention of every neighbor on the block. Madison instantly rushed to her side, hovering over her with exaggerated horror before directing a venomous glare straight at me. "Look at what you've done to Mom!" Madison shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at my face. You selfish monster! She's been shaking uncontrollably ever since Friday. Richard marched aggressively toward us, his face flushed dark red with rage. Orch. He didn't even bother checking on his supposedly dying wife. Instead, he jabbed his finger violently near my face. You owe us $50,000, Savannah. Right now! You need to compensate us for the massive reputational damage you caused in Miami. You completely humiliated us in front of the management at the Porsche dealership and ruined the launch of Madison's brand. Orch. I stood completely still, my analytical mind coldly observing their pathetic performance. They weren't here because they missed me, nor were they here to apologize for skipping my wedding. They were here strictly because the ATM had been shut down, and they were suffering from severe financial withdrawal. Before I could say a word, Bennett stepped smoothly in front of me. Orch. He walked straight to the trunk of his car, popped it open, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. A dossier I had compiled weeks ago, knowing this day would eventually arrive. Bennett stepped right up to my father and slammed the thick stack of printed bank statements directly against Richard's chest. Orch. The papers hit with a dull thud before scattering like snowflakes across the concrete, fluttering around Richard's expensive handcrafted Italian leather shoes. Reputational damage? Bennett's voice dropped to a quiet, lethal register I had never heard from him before. He pointed down at the floor of financial records. Let's talk about damage, Richard. Orch. For 10 years, every single dollar of Savannah's salary backed every luxury your family enjoyed. Her hard work paid for Madison's tuition. Her money covered the lease on that SUV parked on my lawn. Her money paid for Beverly's Country Club membership and cosmetic procedures. Bennett took a step closer, forcing Richard to instinctively step back. Orch. And you have the audacity to call my wife a disappointment just because she doesn't parade her life online? You're nothing but parasites. You drained her resources to sustain yourselves, and the moment she stops letting you bleed her dry, you show up at my home demanding more. The brutal truth echoed down the quiet suburban street, completely shattering their illusion of superiority. Orch. Beverly miraculously stopped her hyperventilating, sitting up from the grass with her mouth agape. Richard stared down at the bank statements blowing across the driveway, completely unable to form a coherent defense. But Terrence didn't back down. The towering former athlete shoved past Richard, invading Bennett's personal space. Orch. Terrence was massive, a wall of muscle wrapped in a tailored suit, clearly believing he could use physical intimidation against a pediatrician. You better watch your mouth, man. Terrence growled, his voice thick with an implicit threat. You don't know a thing about our family's business. Orch. Savannah is going to reactivate those accounts right now, and she's going to wire that $50,000 immediately to cover the lost deposit in Miami. If she doesn't, I will flatten you, and then I'll take everything she owns in court. Bennett didn't even flinch. His day job involved fighting critical illnesses and holding the hands of frightened children. Orch. A washed-up athlete posturing in a suburban driveway didn't intimidate him in the slightest. Bennett looked up at Terrence with absolute composure. Lay a finger on me, and you'll be in handcuffs for assault before you can even blink. The tension in the air was suffocating. Madison was screaming about her ruined brand. Richard was yelling about family loyalty, and Terrence looked ready to swing. Orch. Right then, a sharp sound cut straight through the chaos. It was an abrasive, high-pitched alarm ringing from my handbag. Not a police siren, not a fire alarm. It was coming directly from my phone. I pulled out the device. The screen was flashing a glaring red. Orch. It was a high-priority credit monitoring alert from Equifax, a specialized service I typically set up for my ultra-high net worth clients, though I maintained it for myself as well. An automated message popped up across the screen in bold black text against the crimson background. Orch. I stared at the words, my background in forensic accounting instantly calculating the catastrophic scale of what I was reading. The color drained from my face, and a cold sweat broke out along the back of my neck. I looked up from the screen, my eyes sweeping over all of them. My voice dropped to a hollow whisper, yet somehow carried over all the shouting in the driveway. "What did you do?" Porch. My family went dead silent. Terrence nervously shifted his weight. Richard guiltily refused to make eye contact. I read the notification out loud, my voice trembling from sheer shock and rising fury. Critical alert. A $1.2 million federal Small Business Administration loan associated with your Social Security number is 90 days past due. Imminent default. Porch. I stared at the four people standing on my driveway. They hadn't just taken advantage of my generosity. They hadn't just maxed out my credit card. They had stolen my identity, committed federal financial fraud, and forcibly saddled me with $1.2 million in debt. I stood in the driveway, staring fixedly at the glaring red notification on my phone screen. Porch. Absolute silence settled over the cool autumn night. Beverly stopped her dramatic gasping. Richard shifted uncomfortably, and Terrence dropped his aggressive posture, suddenly realizing that the financial time bomb he thought he had buried had just detonated right in his face. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Porch. My brain instantly bypassed the emotional shock of family betrayal, shifting directly into cold, professional execution. Looking up from my phone, I locked eyes with my father. "Bennett, clear them off our property before I dial the authorities." Without waiting for their reaction, I turned on my heel, walked into my quiet house, and went straight to my home office. Porch. I locked the heavy oak door behind me and sat at my desk. I booted up my encrypted terminal and powered on multiple displays. As a senior forensic accountant at one of Chicago's top financial firms, my entire career was built on dismantling white-collar crime. My daily work involved tracing offshore accounts, uncovering corporate embezzlement, and testifying in high-stakes fraud cases. Porch. I knew exactly how to track down money people tried desperately to hide. Tracing a domestic commercial loan was elementary arithmetic for me. Bypassing standard consumer credit portals, I used our firm's secure compliance portal to access the Federal Commercial Loan Registry directly. Porch. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering my Social Security number and cross-referencing it against active commercial liability databases. In under 15 minutes, the federal database generated a massive digital file. It was the original application package for a Small Business Administration loan, totaling exactly $1,200,000. Porch. The primary borrower was an LLC registered entirely under Madison and Terrence's names, the parent company for my sister's so-called lifestyle brand. I skimmed through hundreds of pages of digital documentation, skipping the fabricated business plans and fake revenue projections. When I reached the guarantor section, I froze. Porch. There, listed as the primary personal guarantor for this massive debt, was my name. I pulled up the signature page. Someone had painstakingly forged my signature. The curves and slants were a decent imitation, clearly practiced over time. But to an eye trained in forensics, the hesitation marks in the ink strokes were unmistakably obvious. Porch. My own flesh and blood had stolen my Social Security number just to buy my sister a fake commercial empire. But what truly disgusted me was the income verification section. A loan of this magnitude required rock-solid evidence of substantial, continuous cash flow. To clear federal underwriting guidelines, the bank needed to see years of reliable income statements. Porch. I dug deeper into the attached financial schedules and found the smoking gun. That $5,000 a month, the money I had squeezed out of my paycheck every month to ensure my parents had a comfortable retirement, had been deliberately miscategorized. They had classified my monthly gifts as regular executive consulting fees, paid to their holding company. Porch. My family had weaponized my pure generosity. They used the money I gave them out of love to prove to a federal lender that Madison and Terrence's shell company had reliable, continuous cash flow. The moment I stood in my wedding dress and canceled that automatic transfer, The bank's underwriting algorithms instantly flagged the interruption in cash flow. Torch. The sudden lack of deposits triggered an account audit, froze their credit line, and immediately initiated default proceedings. They had orchestrated a highly complex, premeditated financial scheme, using my clean reputation to back the entire operation. I leaned back in my leather office chair, the blue light of the monitors reflecting off my face. Torch. The sheer audacity of the fraud was appalling, but my investigation wasn't complete. A federal loan of over $1 million required more than just a forged signature and falsified cash flow. The lending bank would have required tangible collateral to secure a government-backed commercial loan. I needed to know what asset they had pledged against this debt. Torch. I logged into the county recorder's property database and ran a deep search on the loan's collateral filings. The system processed for a moment before loading a mortgage agreement document. When the file rendered on my screen, my blood ran completely cold. It was a real estate deed. Torch. To secure the fraudulent loan, Beverly and Richard had secretly put up the title to their own suburban home as collateral. I stared at the screen as the impossible weight of the situation landed on me. I was trapped in a perfect, devastating dilemma. Torch. If I walked into the FBI field office tomorrow morning and reported the identity theft, the federal government would initiate an immediate investigation. They would clear my name and wipe the debt from my credit profile. But the investigation would instantly expose the forged signatures. My parents would be indicted for federal wire fraud and identity theft. Torch. They would face federal prison time, and the bank would automatically foreclose on their home, leaving them destitute and homeless. On the other hand, if I chose to remain silent to shield them from prison, I would legally assume the debt as my own. I would be personally responsible for paying back $1.2 million. Torch. It would bankrupt me, destroy my flawless professional standing, and completely undermine the future Bennett and I had just committed to building together. But I have never been a woman to stay paralyzed for long. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. I hit print. Torch. The high-speed printer in my office hummed to life, outputting every page of the SBA loan package, the forged signature pages, the property deed to my parents' house, and the offshore routing numbers I had managed to trace. I packed the thick stack of documents into my leather briefcase. Torch. Walking out to the living room, I kissed Bennett on the cheek and told him I had an urgent client meeting downtown. Until I knew the exact depth of the abyss I was looking into, I didn't want to drag him into my family's darkest mess. I got into my car and programmed Terrence's corporate headquarters into the GPS. Torch. For months, Terrence had been bragging about his top-tier venture capital firm, operating out of a prime location in the financial district. He constantly posted photos online, wearing tailored suits, smoking cigars, and talking endlessly about generational wealth. When I pulled up to the address, I found a rundown strip mall, squeezed between a discount liquor store and a vacant lot. Torch. I walked through the sliding glass doors into a cheap co-working space that smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation. Bypassing the front desk, I walked down a narrow hallway until I found a glass door bearing the logo for Madison's lifestyle brand, stuck on like a cheap decal. I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the door open and kicked it shut behind me, letting it slam with a heavy thud. Torch. Madison and Terrence were sitting at a wobbly particle board desk. Madison was holding a ring light and her phone, clearly recording content for her social media followers. When she saw me, she rolled her eyes and slapped the phone face down on the desk. "Look who decided to show up," Madison sneered, crossing her arms. "Are you here to apply for a job? Torch. Or did you just come to see what real success looks like? Cancel all the transfers you want, Savannah. My husband is a venture capitalist. We don't need your pathetic handouts anymore. Though it's cute you drove all the way out here to apologize." I didn't say a word to my sister. I walked straight up to the desk, unclasped my briefcase, and pulled out the thick dossier. Torch. I slammed it down onto the desk so hard that Terrence's coffee cup rattled. "I'm not here to apologize," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, laced with dangerous calm. "I'm here to ask you a very simple accounting question, Terrence. How exactly did you manage to blow through $1.2 million in under 90 days? Madison frowned, looking between me and her husband, genuinely bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "Your husband," I said, tapping the heavy file, "isn't a venture capitalist. He's a total fraud. Beverly and Richard forged my signature to secure a government-backed commercial loan for your ridiculous lifestyle brand. But Terrence didn't put a single dime of that money into your business." I flipped the folder open, revealing the IP tracking logs and offshore wire receipts I had pulled from the commercial database. "The money didn't go to suppliers, commercial real estate, or branding," I explained, forcing Madison to look at the highlighted numbers. "It was wired directly to offshore, illegal sports gambling operations in the Cayman Islands." "Terrence is an irredeemable illegal gambler, Madison. He gambled away the entire $1.2 million loan on football games and horse races. And because he lost every cent, the loan is now in default." Madison stared at the documents, the color draining completely from her face. She looked at Terrence, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to yell at me and accuse me of fabricating malicious lies. She was desperate for him to prove he was still the successful, wealthy entrepreneur she had been bragging about to all her friends. But Terrence didn't shout, he didn't show even a flicker of shame. Instead, a slow, arrogant smirk spread across his face. The muscular former athlete leaned back in his cheap office chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. He was completely unbothered by the fact that I had just uncovered a massive federal crime. "You're a smart girl, Savannah," Terrence said, his voice dripping with condescending arrogance. "You figured out the numbers, I'll give you that. But you're missing the bigger picture." He leaned forward, resting his massive elbows on the desk, staring straight into my eyes. "Go ahead, call the authorities. Report the identity theft right now. The second you tell federal agents you didn't sign those documents, they'll arrest your mom and dad for forging federal loan papers. They'll be looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison." Terrence grinned, baring his teeth in a predatory smile. "And don't forget the collateral, Savannah. Even before a trial starts, the bank will seize your parents' house. They'll be homeless felons. So tell me, let's see if your pristine, perfect doctor husband stays around when he finds out he married the woman who put her own parents behind bars." He leaned back in his chair. "You're going to sit there, pay the monthly minimums like a good girl, and keep your mouth shut. Have a safe drive home." I stared at Terrence as his threat hung in the stale air of the cheap office. He truly believed he had me backed into a corner. He thought my love for my parents would override my self-preservation instincts. He assumed I would quietly absorb a massive federal debt just to keep my parents out of prison. I didn't scream at him. I didn't lose my temper. I simply picked up my empty leather briefcase, turned on my heel, and walked out the door without saying a word. I knew exactly where I needed to go next. Terrence was merely a parasite feeding on a host. The real architects of this fraud were the two people who had brought me into this world. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It was precisely 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. I knew with absolute certainty where Beverly and Richard would be. I drove straight to the Oakbrook Country Club. It was an exclusive, members-only establishment, surrounded by manicured golf courses, radiating an aura of pretentious wealth. My parents had maintained an expensive membership there for years, funded entirely by the recurring transfer I had just canceled. I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the heavy mahogany front doors. Bypassing the reception desk, I walked directly into the grand dining room. The space smelled of expensive perfume, pressed linen tablecloths, and roasted seafood. Scanning the room, I located them immediately. Beverly and Richard were sitting at a prime table near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dressed in immaculate country club attire, they were laughing loudly with another wealthy couple. Beverly was elegantly sipping a bowl of lobster bisque, the diamond rings on her fingers catching the afternoon sunlight. They looked completely unbothered. They certainly didn't look like people who had just committed a major federal offense carrying up to a decade in prison. I walked up to their table. The polite smiles on their friends' faces vanished the moment they saw the cold, resolute expression on mine. Beverly looked up, her spoon hovering in midair. "Savannah," my mother said, her tone strained and artificially bright. "What a surprise. We're just having lunch with the Hamiltons." I skipped the pleasantries. Unzipping my briefcase, I pulled out the SBA loan documents bearing the forged signatures. I slammed the thick stack of papers down onto the white tablecloth, sliding it right under Beverly's soup bowl. The heavy federal seal and glaringly forged signatures sat right next to her silver spoon. "You need to excuse yourselves right now," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, dangerous authority. "Or I can personally explain to the Hamiltons how you sustain your lifestyle by stealing your daughter's social security number." The color completely drained from Richard's face. He snatched the documents, folding them quickly to hide the text. Muttering a hasty apology to their bewildered friends, he grabbed Beverly by the arm and marched toward a secluded alcove near the wine cellar. I followed right behind them, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. When he made sure no one was within earshot, I expected them to break down. I thought they would drop to their knees, beg for my forgiveness, and try to explain how they had made a desperate, terrible mistake. Instead, Richard squared his shoulders and turned on me, jabbing an angry finger at my face. "How dare you ambush us in front of our friends?" Richard hissed under his breath. "You're acting like a hysterical child over a simple financial arrangement." "A simple financial arrangement?" I repeated, staring at him in utter disbelief. "You committed identity theft. You forged my signature on federal documents for a $1.2 million commercial loan, and you put up the deed to your own house as collateral. If I report this, both of you will be arrested by federal agents for wire fraud." Beverly rolled her eyes, crossing her arms defensively. "Oh, please, Savannah, stop being so dramatic. We had to use your credit profile because Terrence needed capital to launch Madison's business. You're a wealthy woman. You should be happy for your sister's success." Richard took a step closer, dropping any pretense of parental affection. His eyes were cold, filled with an unyielding sense of entitlement. "We gave you life," Richard growled. "We provided a roof over your head for 18 years. You owe us your credit score. You make a high six-figure salary at that corporate firm. All you have to do is pay the monthly minimums on this loan to keep this family intact. It's a drop in the bucket for someone in your tax bracket. You're just being greedy." I stood in the quiet alcove of the country club, listening to the man who raised me demand that I cover a $1 million gambling debt just to preserve his pathetic pride. I looked at my mother, who was nodding in agreement, visibly annoyed that her lobster lunch had been interrupted. In that precise moment, a profound, chilling clarity washed over me. They felt zero guilt. They didn't see me as a daughter at all. They saw me as a bank account. They truly believed that giving birth to me gave them the absolute right to consume my identity, my career, and my future. The final fragile thread of familial loyalty I had been clinging to snapped, completely dissolving away. I realized I couldn't save them, and more importantly, I didn't want to save them anymore. "I am not paying a single cent," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "You made your bed, now you can lie in it." I turned my back on them and walked away, leaving them standing in the shadow of the wine cellar. As I strode through the dining room and into the grand lobby, I felt a massive weight lift from my shoulders. I was finally completely free from their emotional manipulation. But as I approached the exit, I caught the sound of familiar, dramatic sobbing near the coat check. I stopped and looked over. Madison was standing in a corner of the lobby. She had set up a portable ring light on a marble table, her phone mounted on a tripod. She was staring into the camera lens, crying perfectly calculated, heavy tears that streaked her expensive mascara. I stepped behind a decorative pillar, quietly listening to what my sister was broadcasting to the entire internet. I just wanted to share the truth with everyone. Madison sobbed into the camera, dabbing her eyes with manicured hands. My sister, Savannah, has always hated me. But today, she crossed the line. She is exceptionally wealthy, works in corporate finance, and she's using her money and power to try to destroy my husband's legitimate business. Madison sniffled loudly, playing the ultimate victim. Terrence works so hard. He's a brilliant African-American entrepreneur trying to build generational wealth for our family. But my racist, jealous sister can't handle seeing a black man succeed. She cut off our funding through legal loopholes out of pure malice. Please share this video. We can't let toxic, elitist people tear down hardworking minority businesses. I stared at her in sheer horror. Madison wasn't just lying. She was weaponizing race and social justice to launch a digital smear campaign against me. She was deliberately inciting an internet mob, trying to completely erase my career and reputation. I watched as she finished recording and immediately uploaded it to her massive social media following. I could even see notification bubbles flooding her screen in real time. The video was already going viral. Over the weekend, I watched in absolute helplessness as my sister manipulated the internet with terrifying precision. By Sunday night, Madison's tearful video had surpassed 3 million views across multiple social media platforms. She skillfully weaponized the cultural climate, crafting a masterclass in digital deception. To her fanatical followers, I was no longer the victim of identity theft. I had been painted as a cruel, elitist, cold-blooded corporate monster, trying to destroy a hard-working African-American entrepreneur out of unprovoked racial malice. She knew precisely which buzzwords would ignite a blind, angry digital mob, and her followers swallowed every word without a second thought. When Monday morning arrived, Bennett begged me to stay home and let corporate lawyers handle the fallout. But hiding was exactly what my family expected me to do. They wanted me paralyzed by shame. I put on my sharpest tailored suit, kissed my husband goodbye, and drove straight into the heart of the financial district. The moment the elevator doors opened onto my firm's floor, the shift in atmosphere was suffocating. Normally, the corporate trading floor was alive with the hum of clacking keyboards, ringing phones, and market analysis. But today, the second my heels struck the polished hardwood, a heavy, dead silence settled over the massive open workspace. Junior analysts immediately looked away, pretending to study their monitors. Senior associates huddled in tight, tense circles by the water cooler, whispering among themselves. My executive assistant intercepted me before I even reached my office door. She looked terrified, clutching an iPad tightly to her chest. She turned the screen toward me, showing our firm's business profile page on Google. Overnight, Madison's organized online army had flooded the page with over 4,000 one-star reviews. Calling me out by name, they labeled me a corporate thief, a racist sabotager, and a disgrace to the financial industry. They overwhelmed the firm's comment section, demanding my immediate termination. The firm's flawless 5-star reputation, built over decades of high-net-worth wealth management, had plummeted to a staggering 2.1 in just a few hours. Before I could even put down my briefcase, my desk phone rang. It was the executive secretary for the managing partners. I was being summoned to the main glass-walled boardroom. I didn't hesitate, holding my head high as I walked down the long corridor, even as panic clawed at my throat. I pushed open the heavy glass doors. 2 senior partners sat at the end of the massive mahogany table, their expressions cold and rigid. They didn't invite me to sit. They had projected the viral video, and the plummeting public ratings directly onto the massive presentation screen behind them. They didn't ask how my weekend wedding was. Instead, they launched straight into a brutal interrogation, questioning my ethics, my emotional stability, and my professional integrity. They reminded me in no uncertain terms that forensic accounting relies entirely on flawless public trust and absolute ethical transparency. Even a hint of racial bias or corporate sabotage could cause the firm to lose billions in client assets. Gripping the back of a leather chair, I stood at the far end of the table. I was not going to let my family destroy the career I had sacrificed my youth to build. Locking eyes with my bosses, I fought back. I reminded them that I had built the firm's forensic department from the ground up, bringing in millions in clean, undisputed revenue over the last 7 years. I have never had a single ethical violation, I stated, my voice echoing in the cold room. I don't operate on internet gossip. I operate on federal documents and verified ledgers. I am not the perpetrator of corporate sabotage. I am the victim of massive federal identity theft, orchestrated by my own biological parents to fund a commercial loan that the man in that video gambled away in illegal sports betting. Both partners stared at me, visibly shocked by the scale of the revelation. However, corporate risk management doesn't operate on empathy. The senior partner leaned forward, resting his hands together. He coldly informed me that while he sympathized with my family trauma, the firm was losing public credibility by the minute. He demanded concrete, irrefutable proof of the fraud by the end of the business day. If I couldn't produce federal documents to clear my name, they would be forced to suspend my license and place me on indefinite administrative leave to quiet the online mob. I opened my mouth to assure them I had the original SBA loan package ready to print, but the words caught in my throat. A sudden, chaotic disturbance erupted outside the boardroom. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, I saw the unimaginable happening in real time. Beverly had somehow bypassed front desk security. She was marching straight into the center of the corporate lobby, wearing an immaculate Chanel-style designer tweed jacket, purchased with my stolen funds. Stopping dead center in the lobby, surrounded by staring financial executives and high-net-worth clients, Beverly's knees buckled. With a dramatic, ear-splitting wail, she dropped heavily onto the polished marble floor. Throwing her hands into the air, she broke into hysterical sobbing, burying her face in her hands. She began screaming at the top of her lungs, demanding the CEO come downstairs immediately. She wailed that she was a desperate, impoverished mother pushed to the brink, begging the firm to force her cruel, heartless daughter to return the retirement funds she had supposedly stolen. I watched through the glass in utter horror. My mother was weaponizing her own dignity, staging the ultimate public humiliation to force me into submission. I shoved open the heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom, leaving both senior partners sitting there speechless. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I forced my posture straight, walking down the long corporate hallway toward the main lobby. My heels clicked sharply against the polished floor, sounding like a metronome ticking down toward absolute disaster. Every desk I passed was dead silent. Junior analysts and senior associates stood up, peering over their monitors to watch the spectacle unfolding at the front of the building. When I reached the spacious marble lobby, the scene before me was suffocatingly absurd. The grand entrance of our firm, usually a sanctuary of hushed conversations and quiet wealth, had been turned into a daytime soap opera. Beverly was right in the middle of the room. I knew exactly how much her outfit cost, because I had paid off the credit card bill for it 3 months ago. Now she was using those luxurious clothes as her stage costume. Her designer handbag was tossed aside haphazardly. She clutched her chest, her shoulders heaving with loud, dramatic sobs. Real tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, an Oscar-worthy performance designed entirely to execute me in the court of public opinion. Porch. Please, someone help me. Beverly wailed to the surrounding crowd of financial executives, portfolio managers, and horrified clients. My own daughter, Savannah, stole our life savings. She took everything her father and I worked our entire lives for. I'm a desperate mother, begging you to make her give our money back. She's leaving us to starve in the streets. Porch. The whispers in the lobby grew louder. People started pulling out their phones to record. Every second she stayed on that floor multiplied the damage to my professional reputation. Suddenly, a heavy hand grabbed my elbow. Turning around, I saw the firm's human resources director standing beside me. Porch. His tailored suit was soaked with sweat, his face pale from the public relations nightmare unfolding in our lobby. Leaning in, he gripped my arm tightly, almost aggressively. Savannah, you need to handle this right now, he hissed, his voice thick with corporate panic. The managing partners are watching. The entire client floor is watching. Porch, get her out of here, calm her down, and fix this quietly. If you can't stop this in 30 seconds, I will revoke your access badge, and you'll be suspended without pay before lunch. I looked at the HR director, seeing the panic in his eyes, the raw terror of corporate scandal. He wanted me to break. Porch. He wanted me to rush to my mother's side, drop to my knees, beg for her forgiveness, and promise her anything, just to make the screaming stop. And that was precisely what Beverly had calculated. She was betting I would yield out of fear of losing my six-figure job. I gently but firmly pulled my arm out of the HR director's grip. I'll handle it, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Porch, but I'm handling it my way. Walking away from him, I stepped directly into the center of the lobby. The crowd parted for me, everyone holding their breath. As I approached, Beverly looked up. Through her dramatic, tear-filled eyes, I caught a brief flicker of triumphant satisfaction. She thought she had won. Porch. She expected me to pull her up, usher her into a private room, and agree to absorb the massive fraudulent debt to save my job. Instead of offering comfort, I stopped 5 feet away. I didn't bend down. I didn't soften my expression. Looking past my weeping mother, I locked eyes with the terrified building security chief standing near the reception desk. Porch. Excuse me, I spoke, intentionally throwing my voice so it echoed clearly off the high marble walls, ensuring everyone in the room heard me. This individual does not have security clearance for this floor. She is trespassing and creating a public disturbance. Please contact the Chicago Police Department immediately and have security physically escort her off the premises. Porch. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. The HR director nearly choked on air. Beverly's dramatic sobbing stopped instantly. The illusion of the heartbroken, impoverished mother shattered, replaced by a look of raw, unfiltered panic. She finally realized I was genuinely willing to have her removed in handcuffs in front of Chicago's financial elite. The reality hit her like a freight train. Porch. Lunging forward from her knees, she grabbed my wrist, her manicured nails digging desperately into my skin. Savannah. You can't do this, she whispered harshly, completely dropping the act. I didn't pull away, letting her grip my wrist. Bending down, I brought my face inches from hers, close enough to smell the expensive perfume she bought with my stolen funds. Porch. I spoke in a quiet, lethal whisper meant strictly for her ears. You want me to take care of that $1.2 million federal debt? I murmured, locking eyes with her terrified gaze. Fine, I will. But we do this on my terms. Meet me at my attorney's office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. And if you ever pull a stunt like this at my workplace again, I won't just call the local police. Porch. I will personally deliver that forged mortgage deed straight to the FBI. Standing back up, I smoothed the lapels of my custom suit. Giving her one last cold look, I turned and walked toward the elevators with absolute composure, leaving her kneeling on the marble floor as security officers approached her. I walked out of the corporate lobby without looking back once. Porch. The sound of Beverly's voice faded behind the heavy glass doors. I didn't return to my office. My senior partners wanted irrefutable evidence to save the firm's reputation, and I would give it to them, but on my own timeline. Hailing a cab, I gave the driver an address on the other side of the city. I was heading to the office of an independent corporate attorney named Mr. Thorne. He didn't work for my firm, nor did he handle family law or gentle out-of-court settlements. He was a ruthless corporate litigator specializing in hostile takeovers and aggressive financial restructuring. Stepping into his conference room overlooking the Chicago River, I spread the entire stack of forged SBA loan documents across his desk. I explained exactly what my family had done and told him precisely how I wanted to dismantle them. For the next 6 hours, we sat in that room drafting a masterclass in legal maneuvering. I applied every ounce of my forensic accounting background to structure the financial mechanisms, while Mr. Thorne weaponized the legal terminology. We were building a Trojan horse. When I finally returned to my quiet suburban home, it was past 9 at night. The dining room table quickly filled with the heavy, dense contracts we had drafted. I stood over the table, highlighting specific clauses and cross-referencing corporate tax codes. Bennett walked into the dining room, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. Resting his chin on my shoulder, he looked down at the sea of legal documents. I could feel the tension radiating off him. As a pediatric oncologist, Bennett dedicated his life to healing and comfort. Watching his wife transform into a cold, calculated force was a lot to process. "Savannah, you don't have to do this," Bennett said softly, genuine concern in his voice. "This toxic warfare is destroying your peace of mind. We have savings, and I make a great living. We can hire the best litigator in the city, report the identity theft to the authorities, and let lawyers fight this out in court. We can protect ourselves without you having to face them directly." Turning in his embrace, I looked up at his kind, worried eyes, gently cupping his face. "This isn't just about paying lawyer fees," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "If I simply report the identity theft, they'll drag this out in civil court for years. Beverly and Richard will play the victim before every judge and jury they can find. Terrence will use the lengthy legal process to keep bleeding my parents dry, and Madison will continue smearing my name online to fund her lifestyle. I can't just treat the symptoms, Bennett. I have to completely sever this tumor, and I have to do it so cleanly that they can never come after us again." Pulling out a chair for him, I handed him the thickest stack of contracts, asking him to read the middle section. Bennett put on his reading glasses and scanned the documents. On the surface, the paperwork read like a standard, albeit complex, debt assumption agreement. The first few pages were filled with standard corporate boilerplates, indicating that I, as the wealthy, successful daughter, was stepping in to take over the $1.2 million commercial loan to save my parents from federal prosecution and foreclosure. It looked like a total surrender. But as Bennett read deeper, reaching page 47, his brow furrowed. He read the clause twice, his eyes widening as he realized what he was looking at. Buried beneath layers of obscure corporate tax codes and trustee restructuring clauses was an absolute, unconditional asset transfer provision. By signing the document, Madison and Terrence weren't just letting me handle the debt. They were legally surrendering 100% of their LLC's voting rights and complete creditor authority to a private shell corporation under my absolute control. Even better, Mr. Thorne had embedded an indemnification and trustee confession clause right in the middle of the asset transfer section. By signing the paperwork, my parents and my sister's husband would be signing an absolute, legally binding confession, admitting they fraudulently used federal funds and forged my Social Security number. It was a death warrant disguised as a rescue plan. Bennett placed the papers on the mahogany table, shaking his head as he looked at me. "Savannah, this is brilliant," Bennett said, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "But there's no way they're going to sign this." Terrence is arrogant, but he's not stupid enough to hand over 100% voting control of the company, even if it's failing. And Richard won't sign something this thick without having a lawyer look at it first. I let out a cold smile. George. Picking up the first page of the contract, the executive summary outlining the immediate execution of the agreement. I slid it across the table, pointing to a bolded paragraph at the top. They'll sign it, I said with absolute certainty. They won't even read a single page of the fine print before signing, because I know exactly how my family operates. George. They don't care about voting rights or creditor authority. They only care about immediate gratification and maintaining the illusion of wealth. Bennett read the bolded text, his eyes scanning quickly. He looked up at me, completely stunned. I tapped the paper with my fingernail. They'll sign it, I repeated quietly, because I added a specific execution clause. George. The exact second their signatures are notarized, my shell company will immediately transfer $500,000 in operational funds directly into Terrence and Madison's corporate account. Greed blinds people, and by tomorrow morning, they will willingly walk right into a trap they can never escape. Mr. George. Thorne's office seemed engineered to psychologically overpower anyone who walked through its heavy glass doors. It was a massive corner suite overlooking the Chicago River, decorated with cold steel elements, polished concrete floors, and a huge mahogany conference table that made it feel more like a corporate battlefield than a place for polite conversation. George. I arrived half an hour early to set the scene. I wore a plain gray blazer and kept my makeup intentionally minimal. I needed to look exhausted, like a woman completely broken by the relentless pressure from her family. Bennett sat beside me, holding my hand under the table. He wore a quiet, resigned expression that fit my upcoming performance perfectly. George. At 9 o'clock sharp, the heavy oak door swung open, and my family strolled into the room like triumphant royalty. Beverly led the way, clutching her designer handbag like a trophy. Richard followed right behind her, standing tall with the unfounded arrogance of someone who believed he had just outsmarted the federal banking system. George. Madison and Terrence brought up the rear, whispering to each other with smug, victorious grins. They didn't look like people facing a $1.2 million commercial default and potential federal prison sentences. They looked like predators preparing for a feast. Beverly sat directly across from me in a leather chair, letting out a dramatic sigh as she elegantly adjusted her scarf. George. I knew you'd come to your senses eventually, Savannah, my mother said, her voice dripping with condescension. You've always been stubborn, but I told your father you'd ultimately remember your duty to this family. You just needed a firm reminder of where your true loyalty lies. George. Terrence leaned heavily against the back of Madison's chair, crossing his arms as his tailored suit stretched tight across his broad shoulders. He glared down at me arrogantly. Your little resistance was cute for a desk worker, he sneered. But you're playing in the big leagues now. When a real entrepreneur tells you to get in line, you get in line and open your checkbook. George. Let's get this paperwork over with. I have actual business to handle this afternoon. Sitting at the head of the table, Mr. Thorne played the role of an impartial mediator. Maintaining a completely neutral expression, he pulled the thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase, placing it steadily on the mahogany table. George. The contract was over 80 pages long, filled with the most complex corporate tax codes and trustee restructuring terms imaginable. Looking down at my hands, I played the part of the defeated daughter, taking a deep, trembling breath. This is a complete debt assumption agreement, I said, forcing my voice to sound weak and hesitant. I am taking on the entire $1.2 million liability. George. It will severely drain my liquidity, and you need to understand how much this is costing me. I'm doing this to save Mom and Dad from federal prison and to save your business, Madison. But this completely ruins my 5-year financial plan. Madison scoffed, rolling her eyes in disgust. Oh, please, Savannah, stop playing the victim. You make obscene money analyzing spreadsheets all day. Orch, you can certainly afford to invest in your own sister. Just consider it a late wedding gift, since we were too busy making real corporate moves to attend your budget courthouse ceremony. Pass the pen over and stop whining. Mr. Thorne slid the thick contract across the wide table, placing 4 heavy pens in front of them. Orch. As a strict matter of procedure, I must advise you that this is a legally binding corporate restructuring document, Mr. Thorne stated flatly. You are assuming specific trustee liabilities and transferring operational directives. I strongly advise you to retain independent outside counsel to review these terms before signing. Richard dismissed the attorney with a wave of his hand. Orch. We don't need another hourly lawyer reading through standard corporate fluff. We know exactly what this is. My daughter is backing our company because she legally owes us for raising her. Let's just sign this thing and get out of here. Terrence snatched up the document, not bothering to scroll through the 80 pages. Orch. He didn't read the indemnification clause on page 47 explicitly confessing to federal wire fraud and identity theft. Nor did he read the transfer clause surrendering 100% of his voting rights and creditor authority to me. He flipped straight to the execution summary on page 1, his eyes instantly locking onto the bolded paragraph I knew would blind him. Orch. Look at this, Terrence whispered loudly, tapping the paper with a thick finger and nudging Madison. She's advancing us $500,000 in liquid cash right now. Madison gasped, leaning over to read the clause. It stated clearly that upon notarized signatures, an immediate wire transfer of $500,000 in operational capital would be sent to their primary LLC account. Orch. The scale of that massive cash infusion wiped away whatever tiny shred of caution they might have had. The trap was covered in sugar, and they were swallowing it whole. Grabbing the pens like hungry scavengers, Richard signed first, sweeping his signature across the bottom line. Beverly followed right after, smiling brightly as she signed away her freedom. Orch. Madison and Terrence eagerly executed the corporate transfer agreements, legally handing me the keys to their fraudulent empire, along with their signed confessions. Mr. Thorne collected the documents, stamping them with his official notary seal. It was done. The trap snapped shut, and they had locked themselves inside. Madison stood up, smoothing her designer dress with a smug smirk. Orch. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out a thick gold foil envelope, tossing it across the mahogany table where it slid to a stop in front of me. My lifestyle brand is hosting our official relaunch dinner at the Drake Hotel this Friday night, Madison said, her voice dripping with malice. I'll be on stage personally announcing our massive new funding round to the press and our top investors. Orch. You should come, Savannah. See how real winners celebrate. Just try to dress down so you blend into the background. I picked up the gold foil envelope from the polished table, looking at Madison's triumphant face. I didn't throw the invitation back at her. I simply smiled, slid the envelope into my briefcase, and walked out of the law firm side by side with Bennett. Orch. My family thought they had just taken $500,000 from me. They had no idea they had just signed for the keys to their own prison cells. Once back in my quiet home office, I locked the door and booted up my encrypted terminal. The executed corporate restructuring contract gave me absolute, unconditional control over Madison and Terrence's LLC. Orch. Legally, I was now the sole owner of their brand, giving me the full right to access, monitor, and freeze their corporate bank accounts. Bypassing their old passwords, I submitted the notarized transfer documents to the primary commercial bank, taking full administrative control of their ledgers. Orch. I authorized the release of funds from my private shell company, transferring the $500,000 in operational capital directly into their newly acquired corporate account with a single keystroke. Next, I set up a network of real-time digital tripwires. I programmed the system to trigger instant alerts on my secure display for any movement of funds over $10,000. Orch. The bait was officially in the water, Now I just had to lean back in my leather chair and wait for the bite. I didn't have to wait long. Greed is the most predictable human emotion. Early Tuesday morning, less than 24 hours after the cash cleared into the bank account, the alerts on my computer began ringing loudly. A bright yellow notification flashed on my central screen, indicating a massive capital outflow. Leaning forward, I stared at the scrolling numbers. Terrence wasn't using the fresh $500,000 to pay down the defaulted $1.2 million SBA commercial loan, nor was he using it to pay the event planners or caterers for the lavish relaunch dinner at the Drake Hotel. He was doing precisely what an arrogant, desperate gambler does when handed a free fortune. He was trying to win back his catastrophic losses. I watched the digital transaction unfold in real time. My fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing every piece of metadata before he could cover his tracks. Terrence initiated a massive international wire transfer, moving $250,000 directly out of the corporate account. Tracing the routing numbers, I watched the money jump from Chicago to a correspondent account, ultimately landing in its final destination, an illegal offshore sports gambling operation deep in the Cayman Islands. Terrence clearly thought he was untraceable, assuming that because the company was still under Madison's name on paper, his transactions were hidden behind corporate anonymity. He had no idea that miles away, a senior forensic accountant was logging every IP address, every digital authorization code, and every timestamp of his reckless actions. The digital footprint he left behind was flawless, irrefutable, and completely lethal. By moving corporate capital across international borders to fund illegal sports, gambling, Terrence had just escalated a domestic contract dispute into a massive federal offense. He had committed textbook money laundering and wire fraud, using funds directly tied to an entity currently under investigation for a fraudulent government loan. A cold, profound sense of satisfaction settled deep in my chest. The puzzle was finally complete. I hit print. The high-speed printer in my office hummed to life again, spitting out the final pieces of key evidence needed to dismantle the people who had abused me for years. Taking my time, I carefully assembled the ultimate dossier, using a heavy black binder to organize the countdown to their downfall. In Section 1, I placed the forged SBA loan documents featuring my stolen Social Security number. In Section 2, I carefully filed the mortgage deed to Beverly and Richard's suburban home, proving they used their own property to commit federal fraud. In Section 3, I inserted the legally binding contract they had eagerly signed at the law firm, containing their explicit confessions. Finally, in Section 4, I included the freshly printed offshore wire receipts exposing Terrence's international money laundering. The binder felt heavy in my hands, representing a decade of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and toxic cruelty, now neatly bound in undeniable legal truth. Placing the black binder into my briefcase, I put on my sharpest business suit and left the house. Getting into my car, I merged onto the highway, driving straight toward downtown Chicago. I didn't go to a local police precinct. A suburban detective wouldn't grasp the scale of the corporate crimes buried in these pages. Instead, I drove directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Regional Field Office. Walking through the heavy security doors, I approached the reception desk, presented my professional credentials, and requested an immediate meeting with the duty agents assigned to the Financial Crimes Unit and IRS Criminal Investigation. The trap I set for my family was no longer just a theoretical legal strategy. I was personally delivering the exact execution coordinates to the federal government, and I was going to make sure the timing was completely airtight for Madison's big launch party. Friday evening arrived with a chilling quiet. Federal agents had my binder. The heavy gears of the justice system were quietly moving, preparing to crush the fraudulent empire my family had built. Now, it was time to play my final role. I stood in our spacious master bathroom, staring at my reflection in the bright vanity mirror. Tonight wasn't a brand launch for my sister. It was an execution. And for an execution, you wear the proper armor. I slipped into a custom evening gown, a breathtaking midnight blue silk masterpiece worth $10,000. I bought it with my own clean, audited, heavily protected money. The silk draped over my shoulders, cascading down to the floor with absolute authority. No rented logos, no borrowed jewelry, no maxed-out credit cards. I was the breathing definition of true, undeniable wealth. Bennett walked in, and my breath caught. He wore a sharp black Tom Ford tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He adjusted his silver cufflinks, his expression calm and focused. He looked regal. But more importantly, he looked like a man completely devoted to his wife. He stepped behind me, his warm hands brushing my collarbone as he fastened the delicate clasp of my diamond necklace. Our eyes met in the reflection. The silence between us was heavy with the weight of what we were about to do. We were walking into a crowded ballroom to systematically destroy the lives of the people who raised me. Bennett rested his chin lightly on my shoulder. His voice was soft, laced with deep concern. "Are you absolutely sure you're ready for this, Savannah?" Bennett asked, searching my eyes in the mirror. "Once we step through those hotel doors, there's no turning back. You're about to pull the trigger on your own flesh and blood." I turned to face him, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo jacket. My hands were rock solid. "I'm ready," I told him, my voice quiet but resolute. I spent 33 years letting them convince me that I was the ugly, boring, disappointing failure of this family. I let them use my guilt and responsibility to bleed my bank accounts dry to fund their vanity. But this isn't just about $1.2 million in debt anymore, Bennett. I looked into my husband's eyes, drawing from his quiet strength. "You're a pediatric oncologist," I continued. "You fight tumors for a living. You know better than anyone that if you leave behind even one toxic cell, it eventually mutates, spreads, and destroys the host. Beverly, Richard, Madison, and Terrence are that cancer. They will never stop bleeding us dry. They will never stop forging documents, stealing identities, and using us to fund Terrence's gambling habit. If I don't sever them completely tonight, they will eventually infect the family we're building. I'm performing a surgical amputation to save our future." Bennett listened, his expression softening with profound understanding. "Society conditions us to forgive parents, no matter what they do, preaching that blood is thicker than water. But Bennett knew that blood could also be toxic. He knew that the second my parents put up their own house to steal my social security number, they crossed an unforgivable line. He took my hand, raising my knuckles to his lips for a gentle kiss. "Then let's sever them," Bennett said, his voice echoing absolute loyalty. "You are the strongest woman I've ever met, Savannah. Tonight, you walk into that ballroom, you take back everything they stole from you, and I'll be right beside you the entire time." I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest. For the first time in my life, I was part of a real team. I was no longer the isolated scapegoat scrambling for crumbs of love. I was a forensic accountant armed with federal evidence, holding the hand of a man who loved me unconditionally. We turned off the lights of our peaceful house and stepped out the front door. The crisp Chicago night air hit us, carrying faint scents of rain and asphalt. A sleek black sedan waited at the end of the driveway, its engine idling quietly. The driver stepped out, opening the heavy rear door. I lifted the heavy silk skirt of my gown and slid onto the leather seat. Bennett followed, wrapping a protective arm around my shoulder as the driver shut the door. The sedan pulled away, merging smoothly onto the highway toward the financial district. The city skyline began to rise in the distance, a glowing network of skyscrapers and luxury hotels. Madison's and Terrence were waiting at the Drake Hotel's grand ballroom, completely convinced they had outsmarted me. They thought I was coming to bow my head and hide in the shadows of their fake success. As we merged onto the main avenue, my thigh vibrated. I reached into my evening clutch and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up in the dim back seat. It was a notification from an encrypted messaging application I had installed at the federal field office earlier that afternoon. I opened the app. The message was from the lead agent at IRS Criminal Investigation. I read the brief text, a cold smile spreading across my face. It was just 2 sentences. Federal warrants signed by the judge. We will be staged at the hotel service entrance. I locked the screen and slid the phone back into my clutch. The glowing text faded into the dark silk, but the words were permanently burned into my mind. The warrants were signed. The trap was set. All I had to do was walk in and turn the key. The black sedan pulled up smoothly to the iconic entrance of the historic Drake Hotel. The building stood like a monument to old wealth under the night sky. Uniformed valets stepped forward, opening the heavy doors. Bitter wind from Lake Michigan rushed in, but I didn't shiver. My blood was running hot with adrenaline. Bennett stepped out first, adjusted his cuffs, and offered his hand. I gathered the midnight blue silk of my gown and stepped onto the pavement. We didn't say another word. We didn't need to. Side by side, we walked through the revolving brass doors into the hotel's brightly lit lobby, following the signs toward the grand ballroom. With every step on the carpeted floor, the muffled noise of the party grew louder. Deep bass from an expensive sound system vibrated off the walls, mixed with the rapid click of camera flashes and the roar of hundreds of voices. Madison had spared no expense. Of course, throwing the party of the century is easy when you're using $1.2 million in stolen federal funds. We reached the massive arched doorway of the ballroom. I paused for just a fraction of a second, taking in the scene. The room was a masterclass in financial delusion. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over Chicago's elite. Waiters in white uniforms moved through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and expensive appetizers. A massive ice sculpture bearing the logo of Madison's lifestyle brand melted slowly near the buffet. In the center of the room, standing on a raised platform, were Madison and Terrence, receiving guests like royalty. Madison wore a plunging sequin designer gown, tossing her hair and laughing loudly for local lifestyle reporters. Terrence stood beside her with an unlit cigar, puffing out his chest and pitching his business acumen to actual legitimate investors who had no idea they were talking to an illegal gambling addict. They were celebrating their genius, celebrating what they thought was a victory over me. I placed my hand on Bennett's arm, and we stepped into the ballroom. I didn't try to sneak in or blend with the crowd. Head held high, I walked with absolute authority. The midnight blue silk shimmered under the chandeliers, instantly drawing eyes. It didn't take long for the crowd to notice us. A woman in a silver cocktail dress nudged her husband, pointing her champagne glass at me. Whispers rippled through the room like a sudden drop in air pressure. People recognized me. They had all seen Madison's viral video. They had read the vicious comments labeling me a jealous corporate monster trying to ruin her sister's business. They expected to see me hiding in a corner in shame. Instead, I walked into the lion's den like I owned the building. The crowd naturally parted, clearing a path as we walked deeper into the room. From the corner of my eye, I caught a flash of white fabric moving fast toward us. Beverly. My mother spotted me from across the room, her face twisting into an expression of pure malice. She shoved past a group of socialites, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished floor. Richard followed a few steps behind, his face flushed with rage. Beverly stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing in disgust when she saw my outfit. "Who let you in here?" Beverly hissed, her voice shaking with restrained rage. She kept her volume down to avoid making a scene, but her tone was sharp as a knife. "This is a VIP investor event. This is a celebration of real success, not a charity shelter for a disgruntled accountant." I looked at my mother, the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was a failure, The woman who had stolen my identity and staged a breakdown in my office lobby just to force me into submission. I didn't back down. I didn't raise my voice. Orch. I looked at her with the cold detachment of a forensic auditor reviewing a fraudulent ledger. You need to turn around and walk out that door right now, Beverly commanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the exit. If you don't leave immediately, I'll have hotel security drag you out. You will not ruin your sister's night out of pathetic jealousy. Orch. Maintaining eye contact, I reached into my clutch. My fingers brushed past my phone, gripping a smooth, heavy piece of plastic attached to a silk lanyard. I pulled it out, letting it unroll in my hand. It was a sleek, matte black VIP pass lanyard. This was no standard guest or media pass. Orch. I held it up right in front of Beverly's face, making sure she could read the bold silver letters printed on the dark plastic. It read, Primary Shareholder. Beverly stared at the lanyard, her eyes widening as her gaze darted between the silver letters and my face. Orch. The gears in her mind ground to a halt as the contract she had eagerly signed days ago, stuffed with dense legal terms, finally made sense. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale with terror. I didn't explain what had happened. I didn't waste breath telling her that I legally owned every asset in the room, every ice sculpture, every drop of champagne. Orch. I simply gave her a cold, chilling smile. I dropped the lanyard back into my clutch and snapped it shut. Brushing past my stunned mother's shoulder, I completely ignored Richard, who stood frozen like a statue behind her. Orch. With Bennett by my side, I walked with lethal purpose through the parting crowd straight toward the main stage, the acrylic podium, and the microphone set up in the center of the room. I stood at the podium in the middle of the grand ballroom, holding the cold, heavy microphone. A sharp burst of feedback cut straight through the club music and chatter. The room fell dead silent. Orch. Hundreds of Chicago's elite venture capitalists and lifestyle reporters turned their heads. Champagne glasses frozen in midair. The smile vanished from Madison's face. Her eyes darted frantically between me and stage security as panic tore through her polished mask. Terrence realized his ultimate nightmare was standing in front of him, and his unlit cigar dropped from his hand. Orch. His broad shoulders tensed, and he took an aggressive step forward, fully prepared to charge the stage and rip the microphone from my hands. But Bennett moved faster, stepping smoothly into Terrence's path, his feet firmly planted on the polished wood. He squared his shoulders, blocking the former athlete completely. Orch. Bennett didn't raise a fist or yell. He simply looked up at Terrence with the absolute unshakable calm of a man who dealt with life and death every day. The silent warning was clear. Try touching her. I looked out over the sea of wealthy, expectant faces. My voice amplified through the expensive sound system. Steady, authoritative, and lethal. Orch. Welcome, everyone, I said, my words reaching the deepest corners of the room. My name is Savannah. You might recognize my name from my sister's viral video. She recently introduced me to millions as a jealous, racist corporate failure trying to sabotage her husband's legitimate business. An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the crowd. Orch. Investors shifted nervously, sensing a sudden drop in pressure. But I am not a sabotager, I continued, pacing slowly across the stage. I am a forensic accountant, and legally, as of Wednesday afternoon, I am the 100% owner of the company you are celebrating tonight. The silence in the ballroom turned into absolute shock. Beverly gasped, covering her mouth. Richard froze, pale as a sheet. Orch. Below the stage, Madison shrieked, her voice sharp and desperate. She's lying. Cut her mic. Someone get her off the stage right now. I didn't even blink, not even looking down at my screaming sister. I simply raised my hand and pressed the button on the small black remote I was holding. Orch. Behind me, the giant high-definition LED screen, which had been proudly displaying Madison's brand logo in 30-foot letters, flickered. The logo vanished. In its place appeared a massive, crystal-clear projection of a federal bank statement with highlighted routing numbers. The irrefutable, audited truth hung high above the crowd, displayed for every investor, reporter, and socialite to see. The execution had officially begun. The glaring white light from the high-definition screen bathed the entire ballroom in a cold, clinical glare. Champagne glasses stopped clinking. The quiet chatter of the elite died completely. I turned my back to the crowd for a second, pointing my free hand at the 30-foot projection of federal financial documents. I walked slowly across the stage, my heels tapping rhythmically on the wood, setting the pace for the dismantling of my family. "What you are looking at," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the speakers, "is the foundational capital of my sister's lifestyle brand. The origin story she conveniently left out of her press releases." I pressed the remote. The screen zoomed in on a specific section of the SBA loan documents. The $1,200,000 principal amount was highlighted in bright yellow. 90 days ago, my parents, Beverly and Richard, applied for a commercial loan to fund the business you are celebrating tonight, I explained, keeping my tone cool, calm, and educational. However, they lacked the liquid assets to secure federal approval. So, they bypassed underwriting by stealing my social security number. I pointed a laser pointer at the bottom of the document. "If you look closely at the guarantor signature line, you'll see my name. But as a forensic accountant, my specialty is identifying fraud. The hesitation marks in the curves, the inconsistent pressure, in the ink strokes. These are textbook signs of a practiced forgery. My family committed identity theft just to fund this launch party." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. These people were bankers, venture capitalists, and corporate lawyers. They understood the severe legal consequences of what they were looking at. Forging a signature on a government-backed loan wasn't a family dispute. It was a major federal felony. I gave my family zero room to breathe, pressing the remote again. The loan documents were wiped from the screen, replaced by a dense network of IP logs and international routing numbers. Obtaining fraudulent funds was only half the crime, I told the captivated audience. Where those funds went is where the real truth lies. I guided the crowd's attention to a series of offshore transfers. Terrence presented himself to you as a visionary venture capitalist. But real investors don't wire $250,000 of federal loan money into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. These routing numbers don't belong to garment manufacturers or commercial real estate holdings. They belong to an illegal, unregulated sports gambling operation. Terrence gambled away your investments on football games. The impact on the room was immediate and devastating. The wealthy investors who had been shaking Terrence's hand moments ago recoiled. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in designer gowns took 3 distinct steps back, treating Madison and Terrence like carriers of a contagious virus. In the corporate world, nothing is more repulsive than financial liability. My sister and her husband had just become the most toxic assets in Chicago. The social isolation they feared most was happening in real time. Terrence froze near the edge of the stage. The arrogant swagger he walked in with completely gone. He stared up at the screen, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to construct a lie to counter the concrete proof of his gambling addiction. But numbers don't lie, and the ledger was laid bare for the entire city to see. The suffocating silence was shattered by a loud, desperate shout. My father, Richard, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. His face was a dark purple, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff white collar. He looked completely unhinged, unable to accept that his carefully constructed illusion of wealth was being violently torn apart. "You're crazy!" Richard screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me on stage. "You're destroying this family over a simple misunderstanding." This was a private financial arrangement, and you're trying to ruin your sister's life out of pure malice. You're a terrible daughter. I looked down at the man who raised me, the man who thought he could sacrifice my future, my credit, and my career to fund his favorite daughter's illusion. I didn't raise my voice to match his anger. I didn't need to yell to win this argument. Orch. I simply gave him a cold, empty smile and raised the remote one last time. A simple misunderstanding, Dad, I asked softly into the microphone, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. I pressed the button. Orch. The offshore bank statements vanished from the LED screen, replaced by a high-resolution scan of a property deed. The legal deed to the suburban home Beverly and Richard valued above everything else. When you forge signatures to secure a $1 million federal loan, the bank requires tangible collateral, I explained, looking directly into my father's terrified eyes. Orch. You put up your own house to cover Terrence's gambling debts, and since he lost every cent, the loan is in default. I pressed the remote one final time. A massive, glaring red graphic slammed over the image of their property deed. Bold, inescapable letters covered the entire document. Foreclosure, imminent. Richard stared at those huge red letters. Orch. The word foreclosure seemed to paralyze him completely. He stumbled back, bumping into a cocktail table. The sharp clatter of crystal glasses cut through the shocked silence. My father, a man who had spent his entire adult life projecting an untouchable image of suburban wealth, was watching his ultimate nightmare broadcast in high definition to the world. Orch. Beverly grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket, shaking her head in denial of the reality on screen. Savannah, stop this right now, Beverly begged, her voice cracking under the strain, shifting from malicious anger to raw panic. You've made your point. We can fix the loan. We can sell the cars. Just take that down and don't ruin us completely. Orch. Standing on the platform, I looked down at my mother. She actually thought this was a negotiation. Even now, standing in the ruins of her own deception, she believed that if she cried, I would yield and rescue her from her own actions. She thought I was still the obedient scapegoat. It's too late to fix anything, Mom, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. Orch. You don't own those cars anymore. You don't own the house. And as of Wednesday morning, you don't even have the right to a legal defense. I turned slightly, reaching into the inner pocket of Bennett's tuxedo jacket. My husband gave me a firm, encouraging nod as I pulled out a folded stack of heavy legal documents. Orch. It was the master copy of the corporate restructuring contract, the 80-page document my family had eagerly signed at Mr. Thorne's office days ago. Unfolding the heavy contract, I held it up for the room to see. The bright stage lights illuminated their notarized signatures on the final page. Orch. When you sat in that conference room, you were so blinded by the promise of $500,000 in cash that you didn't bother to read the fine print, I explained, pacing slowly. You thought I was a broken daughter handing over my life savings to save your fake empire. But you forgot you were dealing with a forensic accountant. Orch. I never sign blank checks. I only sign binding audit reports. I flipped straight to page 47. I didn't even need to look for the paragraph. I had drafted it myself, and every word was burned into my memory. Let me read you the specific terms you agreed to, I said, bringing the paper close to the microphone. Section 12, Paragraph 4. Indemnification and Trustee Confession Agreement. Orch. Terrence let out a low, terrified curse as the former athlete realized the horrific trap he had walked into. Madison covered her mouth, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at her husband. The wealthy investors standing near them immediately backed away, treating my sister and her husband like radioactive hazards. Orch. I read the legal text slowly, making sure every investor, reporter, and corporate lawyer in the room absorbed every syllable. By signing this document, the undersigned hereby formally assume full, unconditional, and premeditated legal liability for fraudulently obtaining a small business administration commercial loan. The undersigned further acknowledge the unauthorized use and forgery of Miss Orch. Savannah's Social Security number, explicitly admitting to the illegal transfer of federal capital across international borders. Lowering the contract, I looked directly at the four people who had made my life a living hell. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. To get your hands on my $500,000, you eagerly signed your names. George. In that moment, you legally confessed to wire fraud, identity theft, and SBA loan fraud. I didn't steal your company. I secured a federal crime scene. Madison's knees gave out, and she collapsed onto the polished floor, the heavy sequins of her designer dress pooling around her. George. She began sobbing uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands as the reality of long prison sentences landed on her shoulders. Terrence didn't try to comfort his weeping wife. He backed away slowly toward the shadows of the ballroom, his eyes darting frantically toward the kitchen service exit, looking for an escape route. The finality of my words shattered whatever sanity Beverly had left. George. Realizing she had signed her own confession, handing me the weapon that destroyed her, she snapped. Her mask of elegance evaporated into a sharp, blood-curdling shriek, a terrifying sound stripped of all her country club polish. "You lying, treacherous snake!" Beverly screamed, her face contorted with pure hatred. "I gave you life! I am your mother!" George. She charged the stage like a banshee, attempting to attack me. Kicking off her expensive heels, she scrambled up the wooden steps with her hands outstretched like claws. Desperate to drag me down, tear at my face, and snatch the microphone from my hands. Bennett moved instantly, shifting his weight to intercept her and protect me. But he didn't need to act. Beverly stopped dead in her tracks. George. Her hands froze in mid-air, her enraged screams dying in her throat. At the very back of the ballroom, the carved oak doors burst open with a deafening crash. The heavy doors weren't just pushed open. They were violently breached, slamming against the silk-lined walls with a force that vibrated through the floorboards. The sheer power of the entrance paralyzed the entire room. George. Inches from lunging at me, Beverly froze completely. Her arms dropped limply to her sides, her rage dying in her throat as she slowly turned her head. A black wave of tactical gear flooded the ballroom. Dozens of federal agents in Navy windbreakers with bright yellow FBI lettering surged through the main doors, flanked by armed Chicago police officers. The sheer number of law enforcement personnel was staggering. A coordinated tactical sweep designed to secure a large area and prevent any escape. Through the tall, arched windows, intense red and blue emergency lights from police cruisers parked outside flashed violently into the room. The blinding lights hit the massive crystal chandeliers, scattering thousands of spinning spots across the terrified faces of the guests. In an instant, the golden glow of the high society event was replaced by the harsh, chaotic light of a federal raid. "Nobody move," a commanding voice boomed through a megaphone. "Federal agents. George, keep your hands where we can see them and step back from the center of the room." Chicago's elite plunged into absolute chaos. The illusion of security that money usually provided vanished instantly. Wealthy investors, venture capitalists, and socialites scattered in panic. Champagne glasses slipped from trembling hands, shattering on the hardwood floor. Men in tuxedos and women in couture gowns pressed themselves against the far walls, desperate to distance themselves from my family. Nobody wanted to be caught in the blast radius of a federal financial crime. From my vantage point on the stage, I watched it unfold with the cool detachment of an auditor closing the final book. Bennett stood firmly beside me, his hand steady on my lower back as my anchor, witnessing the storm we summoned take over the room. Terrence, who had been backing toward the shadows, saw the main doors completely blocked. The former athlete looked around wildly, eyes filled with the raw fear of a trapped animal, and locked onto the swinging doors leading to the kitchen service exit. Abandoning all pride, Terrence bolted. He shoved a terrified waiter to the ground, knocked over a silver tray of appetizers, and charged toward the service doors like a runaway bull. But federal agents had already secured the perimeter, anticipating an escape attempt. The second Terrence slammed his massive frame against the swinging doors, they burst open from the other side. Two tactical agents breached the kitchen entrance, meeting Terrence head-on. The collision was brutal and instantaneous. The agents didn't hesitate, taking Terrence down with ruthless efficiency. The sound of their heavy bodies hitting the floor drowned out the screams of the crowd. Terrence struggled and cursed, but he was completely pinned. An agent drove a knee into his shoulder blades, holding the giant down as the metallic click of heavy handcuffs echoed out, signaling the end of his fraudulent empire. His tailored suit was ruined, stained with spilled food and dirt. Seeing her husband violently subdued broke whatever fragile sanity Madison had left. Dropping to her knees, she wailed hysterically, a sharp, agonizing scream of total ruin. In blind panic, she clutched her $10,000 sequined dress, ripping the delicate seams as she wept. Her image as a wealthy lifestyle entrepreneur melted into a pathetic heap of despair right in front of the media and investors she had tried so hard to impress. She screamed for her lawyer, screamed Terrence's name, even screamed for our mother to save her, but no one reached out. Beverly was completely incapable of helping anyone. She remained frozen on the wooden steps, rigid with fear, her eyes locked on the advancing line of federal agents. Richard stood near a cocktail table a few feet away, looking completely hollowed out. He gasped for air, his chest heaving, his face pale and covered in cold sweat. Reality had finally crushed his arrogance to dust. A lead FBI agent, a tall, stern man, separated from the tactical squad. Escorted by 2 officers, he walked purposefully across the center of the room, his heavy boots crunching on broken glass. He didn't even glance at the wealthy guests cowering against the walls. He walked straight toward Richard and Beverly. Stopping in front of my parents, the agent reached behind his belt and pulled out a pair of gleaming steel handcuffs. The metallic clink sounded ethereal in the terrified silence. "Richard Beverly," the agent stated, his voice carrying cold, official authority. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." The words hit my mother like a physical blow. Her knees buckled, and Richard had to grab her arm to keep her from collapsing like Madison. The overwhelming terror was finally real. Their country club arrogance, toxic superiority, and relentless manipulation vanished. Beverly slowly raised her head, looking up at me. I stood safely on the platform behind the impenetrable wall of federal evidence, completely out of reach. Pure, unfiltered tears of despair streamed down her face, ruining her makeup and staining her silk collar. She reached a trembling hand out toward me, her voice breaking into a pathetic, heart-wrenching sob. "Tell them it's a mistake," Beverly begged, breaking into real terror as officers stepped forward to grab her arms. "Savannah, please, we're your mother and father." I stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at the absolute destruction of the people who had intimidated me my entire life. The tall arched windows of the Drake Hotel ballroom were completely washed in the red and blue flashing lights of the police cruisers outside. The luxurious crystal chandeliers seemed to vibrate with the heavy, chaotic footsteps of federal agents securing the scene. Beverly was on her knees. The immaculate white Chanel-style tweed jacket she bought with my stolen money was now twisted and crumpled, her hands forcibly pinned behind her back. Cold federal handcuffs clicked tightly around her wrists. Straining her neck upward, she stared directly at me with a face completely ruined by running mascara and pure terror. She was begging me to save her, pleading for me to explain to armed federal agents that this was all just a terrible, elaborate prank. She cried out that they were my parents. For 33 years, that title had been used as a weapon. They used it to extract my money, my self-esteem, and my future, hiding behind the word parents as a shield to evade every form of accountability. In that moment, standing under the harsh glare of the stage lights, I felt absolute indifference toward the woman collapsing on the floor. There was no lingering guilt, no tragic sense of filial duty, and no urge to rush down and comfort her. The chain of emotional manipulation that had bound me for decades simply evaporated. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to yell or perform a dramatic scene to prove my point. The microphone carried my calm, unwavering voice clearly across the breathless ballroom. Every investor, reporter, and police officer in the room stopped to listen. I gave you $5,000 every single month, just so you could live comfortably, Mom, I said, every word hitting the quiet room like a heavy stone. I sacrificed my own paycheck for an entire decade to make sure you and Dad enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle you never actually earned. But you were too greedy. You decided my generosity wasn't enough, so you stole my identity and gambled away a federal loan. Beverly let out a strangled, suffocating sob, shaking her head frantically as two Chicago police officers hoisted her up from the floor. Richard was already being escorted toward the heavy oak doors, his head hanging low in absolute, soul-crushing despair. Madison remained collapsed near the melting ice sculpture, weeping hysterically, completely ignored by the investors she had been so desperate to impress. I looked at my mother one last time, letting the finality of my decision sink deep into her panicked eyes. The good news is, the federal government provides a cot and 3 meals a day at no charge. I told her, my voice completely devoid of warmth. For the next decade, you won't ever have to worry about paying rent again. Enjoy your retirement. Bennett looked at the phone in my hand, then up at my face. He didn't ask what I planned to do. He already knew the answer. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. I didn't bother blocking the numbers or turning off the device. I looked at the small, built-in trash compartment embedded in the sedan's center console. Without a second of hesitation, I dropped the vibrating phone straight inside. I snapped the lid shut, completely cutting off the noise. Leaning my head onto Bennett's shoulder, I closed my eyes, letting the quiet, smooth ride carry me toward my real home. Exactly 3 months after the federal raid at the Drake Hotel, the harsh Chicago winter finally receded, giving way to a crisp, clear spring morning. I stood quietly on the sidewalk of the affluent suburban neighborhood where I grew up. Holding a cup of hot coffee in my hands, I watched the steam rise into the cool air. I wasn't there out of nostalgia. I was there to witness the final financial accounting. Across the manicured lawn, 2 county sheriffs stood on the front porch, while bank officials systematically changed the locks on my parents' heavy mahogany doors. The entire process was clinical and completely devoid of emotion. A man in a cheap gray suit walked down the steps holding a heavy-duty staple gun. He stepped over to the decorative wooden post by the mailbox and slammed a bright red and white notice directly onto the wood. The bold black letters read, "Foreclosed." Beverly and Richard had spent decades polishing the illusion of this house. They had hosted lavish dinner parties here, boasting to their country club friends about their flawless real estate investments. But beneath the expensive landscaping and custom architecture, the foundation had been built entirely on my stolen Social Security number. Watching the bank officially seize the property felt like watching a long-overdue audit report, finally balanced to zero. Every action has an equal reaction. Every stolen dollar leaves a digital trail. Every forged signature leaves an undeniable chain of evidence. I didn't need to scream or throw a tantrum to defeat them. I simply gathered the data, traced the money, and let the truth deliver the judgment they deserved. My ledgers were finally in perfect balance. My future was secure, and my life was entirely my own. As for theirs, it finally balanced out to absolute zero. I turned to my husband and raised my glass in the warm, golden afternoon sun. Bennett smiled and stepped closer, his presence a reassuring shield against the world. We clinked our glasses together, the fine crystal producing a clear, bright ring. It was the sound of absolute victory.